strangers brought by the museum in Hotchkiss advertising that they were from Little Rock, Arkansas. And that didn't mean anything to me. I remember a president that may have had something to do with that place. But it turns out that Little Rock, Arkansas, and more specifically, Crossett, Arkansas, plays materially into our history here. And you're going to learn something today that you didn't know before. I can promise you that. And so I've asked Brett Cato to introduce the speaker for our program today. So Brett.
Thank you, Carl. On my notes here. Hello, everyone. Can you just volume here? My name is up a little bit. Okay. My name is Brett Cato. I'm married to Roseanne Gates in Arkansas in August of 1996, 29 years ago this month. For our honeymoon, Roseanne suggested we travel out to the family's mountain cabin in Colorado. So we left out after work one Friday evening. It's a day and a half drive, so that put us in Friday evening after dark, pulling into Crystal Creek out there. So it was completely dark, no moonlight. We rolled up to that gate right there, and there was a bear trap sitting right there. And I didn't really know what to expect, but went on through the gate and turned all the lights on. Still couldn't see anything out in the pasture, none of the mountains, anything. But spent the night. The next morning we woke up and I could see it all then. I just couldn't believe my eyes. You know, it was so beautiful. But for the 29 years I've enjoyed, or I've had the privilege of enjoying the property, hearing a few stories, but I was always intrigued by the limited information and history that was handed down to us, at least in Roseanne's branch. Roseanne's dad passed away about 3 years ago, and he held on to a lot of things, so we're still going through pictures and documents and just trying to figure out what these bits and pieces are and how they fit together. So I became even more and more interested, probably even a bit obsessed, just to be honest with you, but with the Gates family history. So this led me to 5 different county recorder offices in 3 different states, as well as Montrose County Courts and the Colorado Supreme Courts in Denver. So at the same time, I had reached out to Carl and here in the Historical Society, and we're just looking for ideas how to preserve the historical value of that old cabin out there, what to do with it. It's obviously special to us, it's special to a lot of people, you know, here that have stayed there. I mean, we honeymooned out there, so it's kind of hard for me to think about the history and what might happen to it. But anyway, in speaking with Carl about that, he asked me to get some of that information together and share what we knew, so that's what we're going to do today. So with that, I'm going to introduce my wife, Roseanne.
I'm trying not to get tangled up. Sorry, I did have to use my papers. There was a lot of information here. I wish I could just spit it off like that, but you know, I'm about to go senior citizen this year. What do you tell me all the time? My little circuits aren't firing like they used to.
Roseanne,
Hired.
put the mic up to your mouth. We can't hear you. Put the mic up
Okay.
to your mouth.
Okay, so I am here to talk about my great-great-grandfather, Exeter Woodward Cap Gates, as a lot of you know. Thank you all for being here. This is wild. A lot more people than I expected. And I'm here to share some of the story of Gates Camp, which is a property many of you are familiar with out there on Crystal Creek, and our ancestor who brought that lovely piece of heaven into our family. So, yes, sir. Hold it up. Yes, it sounds so loud to me, sorry. Before I go any further, I want to say a couple thank yous. One to the Hotchkiss Crawford Historical Society folks for inviting us to be here today. To my husband Brett, who is my coach, and he really has done the yeoman's share of the research here. All I've done is, they can't?
No, sorry.
Okay,
So,
so, can you hear me now?
is that good?
All I've done is like get out boxes of stuff and take in the box and say, okay, look what's in this one. And then he goes and, like he said, he's really done a lot of the digging, which has been really fun. And I'll say a little bit exhausting. I also want to thank some of the local citizens who are here who have shared information with us. You know who you are. This is such a great community. I mean, it's so cool that everybody's so into the history and so willing to share what they know and what they've uncovered. That just has been really special, and I hope that continues, because there's still a lot to learn, I think. So just really quick about me and why I'm, I guess, qualified to be up here talking about this. I am a great-great-granddaughter of Cap Gates, one of many, I think. So I guess that puts me in the family chain. I am not from here. I'm really not from anywhere. I'm from the Air Force. My dad was career military. So when you say where are you from, I say the Air Force. I don't really have a place. Although I have figured out since I married Brett, who is an Arkansan, I have now lived in Arkansas longer than anywhere else during the course of my life. Time to go. Arkansas is a great place. It is a great place. It's just different. I first came out here, and this kind of was a surprise to me. I came out here for the first time in 1977 when I was 16 years old. So my family has talked about this place my whole life. My grandparents were out here every summer. My dad and his brothers were out here all the time. Of course, our Allen cousins lived out here, but I never got here until 1977. But I've really been trying to make up for lost time. With lots of subsequent trips. Brett and I have also bought a home in Mayard. We bought it almost 3 years ago now. We are just right up above our ranch, and we plan to retire here if we can ever stop working. Aren't we going to? Oh my gosh, hard to do these days. Scary to do. So anyway. We have a slide, a little, not a complete family tree by any means, so we do have we do have quite a few of our family members here today, so if you're not on the tree, please, we did not mean any offense. There's just not a lot of room, so we were trying to capture people that we knew y'all in the community might know or have known of. So, Cap and Rose are our ancestors who bought the place out in Crystal Creek and I guess started our journeys here. Philip is his first son, who is my great-grandfather. Dorothy, daughter, who lived out here, and many of you know or knew Dorothy, and many of you know her family, her children. And then Edward was the third son. We don't have Logan on the tree, but Logan goes under Brittany Bear, right under here. Logan is her son. We also, I guess I'd like to ask all of you, would you mind waving your hands or standing up and saying who you are? Because we do have quite a few folks who are here who are descendants of Cap. And we have a very special Sally Allen, who some of you know. Sally is the matriarch, the last of her generation, right? Granddaughter, right? You are the granddaughter of Cap. So, really glad Sally could be here with us today too. And Sally has recently moved back to Crawford, close to here, where she was born and raised.
So that's cool. Anyway, and you can just talk to everybody as we go. Okay, I gotta get going because I know a lot of stuff here. Just one other comment I wanted to make. So, you know, you can see we call it ourselves, we identify ourselves by the different branches, right? So my great-grandfather Philip, I'm in the Philip branch. And the Allens, you guys are all in the Allen branch, and then the Edward branch. We don't see as much of them, but my perspective and the information that I have, a lot of it comes from, you know, the Philip branch, what they saved and what was in their tubs of information and all that stuff. So I'm sure there are a lot of other stories and details that the others could share, but I just wanted to maybe some more color. Okay, so let's get to it. Great-great-grandfather Cap, E.W., I'm going to call him E.W. Gates for a while because he really didn't have the nickname of Cap until later. He was born in Big Rock, Iowa. I looked at it on the map. It's a small town near Davenport, Iowa. Who knows why his family went there. He was the 10th of 11 children. And I think the second to the youngest. Around 1882, we think, we have writings that say 1881. When he was about 16 years old, he left home and headed west to make his fortune in the mines. On his mind was silver mining near Gunnison that he'd heard about from one of his older brothers who was already out here. Since it was spring when he got out here and the high country mines weren't open yet, he did a little bit of exploring. He came across through the West Elks, over Black Mesa, somehow landed in the Crystal Valley, came upon the little trading post that we think at the time would have been owned by Kremling by then. No, maybe Freeman. We don't know exactly when he got here. Spent some time there. You know, the interesting thing, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard this, in Betts' writings, called that proprietor Frenchie. I haven't ever seen anything, but that was just what we had in our family lore. But we can't find anything that sort of makes sense for somebody who would be named Frenchie. Anyway, he spent time there, stopped at the trading post, and then went on up to the mines as soon as they were open. I forgot to say that he did end up for a little while, we read this, staying in the area doing some odd jobs for Enos Hotchkiss. And there is a little newspaper clipping where this is where the date thing gets a little squirrely for us, because we really thought he was here in 1882. But this article says that in 1881, he was camped, Enos Hotchkiss observed that he was camped near Hotchkiss and Duke as they were dragging in logs to build their homes near what is now the town of Hotchkiss. So, that would have made him 15. I was awful young till I get out to go find your fortune, but it was a different time. When he went up to the mines, he headed up towards Gothic. He signed on at the nearby Treasure Mountain mine. We got a pretty picture of Treasure Mountain, north of Gothic. His brother worked there as a mine supervisor, so that's, I guess, what probably helped fuel some of that courage to get out here and go. But while he was on the job, a stick of dynamite exploded in his face and put out one eye completely and severely damaged another eye, and he also had quite a few physical injuries from that mining accident. Excuse me. A man by the name of Alex Morrow, you may have heard of him, took Cap in, got him medical care, and actually took care of him until he was recovered enough from the mining accident to get on the train, the ore wagon, back to Gunnison, and then on the train back to Iowa to spend the winter to recover. So Brett mapped it out on, that's a long way for a 13-year-old who's now mostly blind and injured. But anyway, I know all of our ancestors came out here in ways that are unfathomable to me sometimes. So now he's back in Iowa. Can't see very well. Physically has still some issues, recovery, and doesn't know what he's going to do with his life, right? I got to work, I got a job. At this point, he really knew his mining days were over, so for a while, sounds like he might have taken a little bit of time to figure that out. Anyway, he's a motivated kind of a guy from what we've read. I would have liked to have known him. Definitely a doer and an innovator. So he decided that he was going to follow in the footsteps of two of his older brothers who had gone south to Arkansas. Sorry, I'm trying to keep this up here. They had gotten into the lumber industry down in Arkansas, South Arkansas, and Louisiana, which was covered in virgin forests, just waiting for those lumbermen to come down there. And so they did. This is just a little side note about the brother Peter who was at the Gothic mine about 2 years later, so he didn't go back. I guess he stayed and continued to mine. He got caught in an avalanche up there, and he fell 17 or was carried, I guess, by the avalanche, 1,700 feet in an avalanche while he was doing some exploration for the mining company. So, and he survived. He was fine. We heard his hair turned white, but who knows? But due to his poor health now, after that, he also decided to go into the lumber business, decided mining wasn't for him. Anyway, in the spring of 1883, I'll call him young E.W. I don't know what they called him. And he would have been about 17. His oldest brother in Thornton, Arkansas, who was running a mill there, hired him, and Cap went on down to Arkansas to see what he could do. He started, his first job that Brother Albert gave him was a fireman. And so what the fireman does is keep the boiler going. You shovel sawdust into the firebox of the boiler to keep the boilers going for the mill. And that was his first job. And I guess you could do that even if you can't see very well. And he did that for about 19 months. At which point he was promoted and he got to start milling logs. So he was, I guess, probably gaining some self-confidence in that, and certainly was probably not satisfied with shoveling the sawdust into the boiler. So he continued to work his way on up in the mines, and the lumber mills. And by 1888, he was now supervising the operations at this Thornton mill. So he would have been 22 by this time. So a young man climbing was that a corporate ladder back then? I don't know, climbing the ladder. Short time later, and this was interesting to learn too, just about the lumber business, but for that particular mill, they exhausted all the resources. They used up all the trees. And so Brother Albert, who was managing the mill, told young E.W. to dismantle the mill and shut it down, and we're going to move somewhere else, find some more trees. That sounds like a trip, really. I'm glad we don't do it that way anymore. I hope we don't. Anyway, so Cap took charge of that and got the mill moved, reassembled in a town not really too far away called Wilmer. Not that that means anything to y'all, but there are a lot of those little towns down there, and there was a lot of timber down there. So they built up that mill and got it going. In 1892, he married Rose Lee Kennebrew. That's Rose down on the right. In Wilmer, Arkansas. Cap was 26 at this time. She was 18. They had 3 children. The oldest on the left is Philip, who is my grandfather. Next was Dorothy in the middle, who is the grandmother of several folks who are here with us today. And then the third child was Edward, and he was born in 1899. And that was their family. In that same year, he started the Crossett Lumber Company. He convinced some investors from Iowa, which remember is where he's from, and which included yet another older brother. And some of these older brothers were quite older brothers, and they were already being quite successful in the business. But he convinced his older brother Charles, a physician named John Watzik, and an investor named Edward Savage Crossett to help him form a new lumber mill and build a company town, naming it Crossett, as Carl said. And this was a different concept. He really had the idea of wanting to build a town with a community, with good schools, with, entertainment, just not what you would think of for a temporary mill town. This is so let's see. Oh, and a big part of, I think, Cap's legacy for the mill was he had a vision of sustainable forestry, not the let's cut them down and move and cut them down and move, but let's figure out how we can replant, regrow, and stay here. And ultimately, he worked with the forestry division out of Yale University, and they did set up experimental forest there and started doing some pretty innovative things. So he ran that mill for the next 27 years. He was selected by the group to be the manager. And that turned out to be very successful for him and for his investors. So also kept him busy. I don't think he was coming out here too often at that point yet. This is also where he earned the nickname Cap. He wasn't ever in the military, I don't believe, but they said he ran the mill like the military, like a captain, so the nickname knew Cap. One writer wrote about him that, when Cap was running the mill, it was well run and orderly. And another one wrote, of course, think about the times, I just laugh. Radical labor leaders, riffraff, and other undesirables were barred from the company. I thought, okay. Oh, goodness. And he did. He was a man who got things done, an innovator, a visionary, and said that. And really, we read a couple of articles where people had interviewed him, and he really didn't let that loss of his vision get him down. Somebody said, how are you doing this with this handicap, whatever? And he's like, it's not a handicap. He used it as, I guess, a growth opportunity, which is great. Let's see. Okay, so a little bit more about the mill. I know we want to talk mostly about Colorado, but it is kind of amazing some of the stories of how to just get that set up. So he wanted to do this up there in the town he wanted to do it in. They didn't want a mill there, so he had to go out and find some forest and do it. They had to do it on their own. So he found an initial 47,000 acre tract of trees in Arkansas and Louisiana. Paid a lot for that, $7 an acre, which was a lot of money back then. Then he set up a small office in the back of a barber shop and in Hamburg, Arkansas. Some of y'all may have heard of Hamburg because Wesley Savage came from Hamburg. He lived across the street from Cap. And started acquiring smaller parcels from the local farmers and landowners. The farmers didn't like the trees because they couldn't farm. So they thought he was crazy for buying up all this land. And in fact, a quote from an article that we read, he recalled being referred to as a damn fool for buying all that, all these worthless trees, covering farming process. So anyway, I think a lot of those we read he got for about $1.25 an acre. So definitely did better after he got that first stand. Once the company owned 100,000 acres, then they started moving their milling equipment in there. I guess that's what you need to get a good start. I won't dwell on it too much. We saw some pictures. South Arkansas is a swamp. I mean, we are wet all the time. It's humid, and getting the lumber equipment in there and horses and, getting the railroad built. I mean, some of the pictures are just amazing because it really was like trying to do all this in a swamp. It's still pretty swampy down there. Two larger sawmill machines was, and I'm gonna quit talking about this really, but this was another thing that I found interesting. Two larger sawmills were moved in by 1905, and they were producing 250,000 board feet of lumber per 10-hour work shift. And that, I don't really understand what that means, except that it's really a lot. Right? Even maybe in today's. So these guys had it going on down there. I guess that's where the cap comes in. Maybe you had a whip or something, I don't know. So they started producing lumber, building houses for the workers, building the town. And then we just have a few little pictures brought through in there of some of this. It was pretty amazing, and he was the guy behind it, really. Not the money man, but the action man. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, there's some. Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. So, also, we figure his experience of having to gather and acquire all that land, because I guess they couldn't do anything really till they had the 100,000 acres, served him well, and he used that when he came out here, finally, was he able to get out here. You know, one of the things that we hear in our family is that he loved it out here. He loved it out here, but his effort to make a living as a miner didn't go so well, so he had to go make some money. And he figured out a way to do that so that he could come back. Let's see. Colorado. Ranching, this is what we kind of categorize this. Ranching, baseball, and racehorses. Seems very clear that he never forgot his time on the western slope in the beautiful Crystal Creek. Once he was financially settled, he began making investments in Colorado ranch lands. He clearly did, from what we can see, he really wasn't a man who had a lot of personal possessions or really cared about that, other than maybe racehorses, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but he just wanted to share this beautiful country with others. And I think he did. We've read several articles where people talk about Cap Gates and his entourage came out for the summer. So he'd bring people with him all the time. Let's see. Sorry, I have so many notes. Dorothy Allen wrote, we found some notes from her, that he began bringing the family out here to Colorado for the summers to get away from the heat and humidity. And if you haven't ever been to the South in the summer, believe me, that's the thing. In about 1905 is when they started coming out as a family. And those initial summers, Dorothy wrote, they stayed in the Manitou area, not out here. She thought in her letters, suggested that her first visit to the Crystal Creek area was around 1907 or 1908. We believe the family must have been renting it because they didn't own it quite yet. So we don't know, but they were coming out to the same place. So that would have been, who would have owned it then? Stoners, probably, the Stoners, probably. Let's see, sorry. I haven't told this and turned my pages, sorry, y'all. Interesting, another little tidbit, he had an affinity for racehorses. He raced them all over Colorado in later years of his life. But we understand that he used to keep some of them out here at Crystal Creek. He'd bring race horses out here and have them out there in the barn. So that's just a picture of one of them, a racehorse, although that picture was in Arkansas. He also loved baseball. He was sponsored. He's in every high school baseball picture I saw. with, you know, whatever team, whatever grade. But he formed a top-notch team called the Dixie Boys in Arkansas, and he brought them out here. So in the summer of 1908, this team, the Dixie Boys, they're kind of a motley-looking crew too, but he brought them out here on a couple of Pullman cars in the railway, and they toured all over Colorado playing ball. We have Denver, Littleton, Longmont, Castle Rock, Montrose, among other locations. They played at county fairs, park stadiums, local baseball fields throughout the area, just all around Colorado, because he loved baseball. By the end of their tour that summer, they had won 25 of their 35 games. That's pretty impressive, I thought. I know we have some baseball players in this audience. Over the years, he also brought out some other teams. He'd get teams made up of sawmill workers. He'd bring them out. He had some women's softball teams. He'd bring them out. I guess he'd tour them around and they'd play, and then they'd all hang out and probably fish and eat good stuff out on Crystal Creek. He just liked to have fun and share this place with others. About 1908, Cap looked up his old friend Alex Morrow, who had, taken care of him after he was injured in the mining accident. Alex was still out here. This is his marker in the Crawford Cemetery. He's buried there. Alex was born in 1856, so that makes him about 10 years older than Cap. He and his younger brother Duff left their family farm in Pennsylvania in 1882, probably to come to the mines, yes, Gothic and Lake City areas. By 1884, they'd headed into the Crawford area and were raising crops and cattle. They used Duff's cow camp out on the end of Black Mesa for the summer, and that grazing spot is named after Duff. It's known as Morrow Point, as you know. So it's kind of interesting. So Alex and Duff are both buried in the Crawford Cemetery. So when Cap reconnected with Alex Morrow, he was working in a blacksmith shop in Crawford and raising cattle. So they decided to go in together as business partners and form a land and cattle company. Morrow had the cattle ranching experience going, and Cap certainly had experience in land acquisition and business acumen and some financial backing, so they thought they'd make good partners, and I think they did for quite some time. Nothing's wrong. It was a couple of years later, on January 5th of 1910, we found that they bought the property that we now call Gates Camp out on Crystal Creek. Actually, the Morrow and Gates Cattle Company bought it together as one of their investments. And of course, they used it for cow camp and for hay production. In the winter, Morrow took the cattle to Utah, to Barker Ranch, which was near Escalante, Utah. That seems like a long way to me to take the cows, but I just stepped on your glasses. They're cheap. But now you can't see. Sorry about that. Anyway, just a little tidbit about the Barker Ranch is that is where my grandfather met his wife, Ethel Barker, on one of those cowboying trips to get the cows. So, has a lot of sentimental value in my side of the family for sure. Alex Morrow died in 1914. He was only 58 years old. So Cap and Alex's son, Ord Curtis Morrow, did continue to be business partners for a couple of years, but by 1916, Cap had bought him out. In 1915, Cap had set up his oldest son, Philip, who again, Philip's my grandfather, and that's Philip and Ethel, his wife, and two of their three boys. they bought a ranch just north of the mayor's schoolhouse, which included, some of you may be familiar with the Susie Graham place we saw on a lot of the deeds. So they lived there for a few years. My grandfather was born there, and so was child number 2, whose name was Billy. And I have asked a lot of you, Orville, I know I've asked you, Pat, a lot of you have heard me, like, I want to really know where this house really, really was exactly. And everybody has some good ideas and has given us some good information. So anyway, I just say that from my window in my new house, I can see where he was born, and that is okay. So I said in 1916 he bought out Ford Morrow and became the Gates Land and Cattle Company. Also at that time, he employed a young man by the name of Leslie Savage, who, Leslie Savage, I'm sure you have heard of. He was about 33 at the time, and he was a young man who grew up across the street from Cap in Hamburg, Arkansas. And I think Leslie had tuberculosis, so when Cap proposed running the Land and Cattle Company, it seemed like a great thing because, you know, they were hopeful that the dry air would help. And I think indeed it did when he moved out here. So he and his family moved out here. I think he came before he brought them out. We were reading, I think he brought his family out in 1916, and they lived for 3 summers out at Gates Camp in the cabin while they homesteaded their own. And there's a couple of pictures of their homestead cabin back there on the table that I found. But then Leslie and his family moved into town as soon as they met that homestead requirement. So, but there's some pictures of them back there too. Cap and Leslie Savage remained partners for many years and were very, very close. He was a very big part of, I think, the family and of course the business. Over the next several years, now the Gates Land and Cattle Company purchased many ranch lands and homesteaded others throughout the National Monument area, Poison Springs, Onion Valley, Crystal Creek areas, just all over. Brett has some of them laid out. He's mapped all the deeds we can find. It's kind of astounding. To date, am I supposed to say this now? Yeah, to date, we've identified over 12,000 acres of properties that he owned in 1923. Yes, those of us who are still here are sad we don't have some more of that, but you know, what a story. From the deeds we found, it's really fun too because, you know, we see the names that we now start to recognize of the people that he had bought some of these properties from. Some of your ancestors, I'm sure, are up there on that board. Our next door neighbor was Jean Rundle and her family, so it's, you know, it's a small, tight-knit bunch. Those are just some pictures at their mayor house. This was another interesting thing. I assume many of you have noticed. You see this old page wire around a lot of places. So many of these old properties that Cap once owned still have some of that page wire up 115 years later. You can't kill it. If it's on yours, you know. Leslie Savage, in one of his writings, had documented that at one time Cap shipped 3 boxcars full of that page wire stuff out here so that he could repair all of his fences. And in fact, we just finished having somebody replace a long line of the page wire out at Gates Camp. So, you know, it's a little bittersweet, but it was time. I think Cap got his money's worth. Back to the story. So he was purchasing these ranch lands and also having people do some homesteading for him. We couldn't find the picture, but we know there is one that he had what we call his little mobile homes that he had developed, and he'd just move them to the next spot that he needed somebody to take care of the cows and also, oh, by the way, do the homesteading part. So he was going and blowing with that. Someday we'll find a picture, or one of y'all may have one. The homesteading ranchers were working mostly what our family has always called the out west properties. So Brett has them mapped here, a lot of it over there along, in fact, covering most all of the canyon rim, and then up there a little bit behind Gould. I think this is about 7,200 acres. And we have found the deeds for all those pieces of property. So that's kind of cool. One story I will share with y'all. Some of y'all who are in the family may have heard this and may want to dispute it. I don't know, but my dad always told me, every time we come out here, my dad lived in Hotchkiss for 20 years too, so we'd always go to the park, every time we come home. And we'd get out there about to the Kneeling Camel, and he'd say, well, this is where Grandpapa lost his horse off beside the cliff or whatever. So the story is that they were out there with the cows, and my great-grandfather may have had a little too much to drink or something. I don't know, not been paying too much attention, and his horse went over into the canyon. And that was that. So we think it makes sense that that's where that dead horse gulch, dead horse overlook comes from. His horse died there, falling off the canyon. Don't know if that's true, but we like the story. Another really special story that we discovered as Brett was digging into all these deeds and going to all those county offices that he referenced. We did find the deed where 3 months before he died, he donated an 80-acre parcel of that parkside land to the federal government, and writing on the deed, as you can see, for $1 in the love I have of my country. So that was pretty cool, we thought. We'd always heard that he gave some land to the park, and I'm sure there may be other families who have done the same thing, but that was neat to find that, and that was really important to him. Actually, he had given all of his land to his kids already, but he made them give this back, so that he could be the one to deed it over to the Park Service. I thought that was really, really special. And so that parcel is the one where the North Rim Ranger Station sits today. And it goes about to the Y where you're going into the park. So we think about that a lot. And as we know, that probably spurred continued development of the National Monument, which is now the National Park. Over the following years, his 3 kids sold other vital parcels because they had owned all that along the parkland to give better access. I'll have a little more about that later. But so while Cap was still pretty focused on his lumber business in Arkansas, he began raising cattle and Hampshire pigs in Arkansas. And I never knew that he had cows in Arkansas, ever, never had heard that until we started digging into this stuff and found some articles where at one point in time he supposedly had the largest cattle ranches there in Arkansas. But he would ship them out here to Philip on the ranch to raise and sell. So, local newspapers around 1920, and is that one of these up here too? Yeah. Gates Ranch was running approximately 2,500 head of cattle on Black Mesa. So, they were trying to be serious about it. He was serious about it. Let's see. Then we have that cool picture. I think everybody's got one of these. I think there's one on the wall at the Historical Society of the hay stackers. And I don't know what you call those stackers. I know, Mr. Orville, are you here? What is it called?
Mormon stackers.
Mormon stacker. Okay, thank you. Well, I mean, it's just, yeah, I love looking at the picture. So this was one that was out at Gates Camp. You can see. Yeah. That was just a cool picture, we thought. Now our little family story takes a little sad tale. Obviously, Cap loved it out here, tried to get, his son Philip to be a success out here as a ranching man, but didn't quite go that way. We were saying he experienced some of that, what goes up must come down principle. I know it doesn't have to come down for everybody, but it does for some, and I think it did for my great-grandfather. He, let's see, family stories suggest, and I hate to speak ill of the dead, but you know, that's what we've heard, is that his Philip, my grandfather, who was the oldest son of Cap, you know, supposed to be carrying on the legacy, I think. He liked drinking and gambling a lot, and that impacted his ability to succeed in managing such a large ranching enterprise. Probably would have impacted his ability to succeed in a small enterprise, but yeah, so we have one good story. Cousin Sally helped us flesh out the other days that he was on one of his trips to Kansas City taking carloads of cattle to market to sell. And after finalizing the sale, he headed to the gambling halls. Does everybody family have this story too? It's not just us. Anyway, he apparently went all in on a big bet and didn't come home with anything from those few cars of cattle that he was supposed to sell for income, I'm thinking. So Sally was telling us that when he got off, the way she's heard the story too, is that when he got to Saponero and was getting off the train, he didn't even have any money to get his horse out of the livery stable. And so he had a real nice pair of cavalry boots, and they took him in payment. Right? We believe it. But, yeah. So anyway, there was that. And then in 1921, Grandma Rose was diagnosed with stomach cancer. And she was a pretty young woman in 1921. I think she would have been about 47 years old. Sought the best treatment, took her to the Mayo Clinic up in Rochester, Minnesota. You know, I don't know. We don't know what they were thinking about in terms of really could they save her, but since Cap was in charge of the town down there in Crossett, he decided he was going to develop radiation therapy, or X-ray therapy it was called at the time, and add that to the hospital in Crossett so that she didn't have to go so far away to receive her treatments. Because Crossett's down, there's no city down there near there, so, and I don't know if Little Rock even had X-ray radiation treatment at the time, so he got with GE, they designed this thing, they built a wing onto the hospital and trained the professionals down there, and it ended up being, you know, one of the best places in between the major cities for some time. Unfortunately, it did not save Rose's life. She did die a year and a half later at 49, but now the Crossett Hospital had a nice X-ray treatment center, so, you know, it did some good for the town. It's clear he didn't bear any expense for her treatment. She was able to spend her last years at home with her family. From what we read, her daughter Dorothy, who was from here, was at her side almost continuously that last year and a half, and she had only been married about a year and a half. So I guess she got married and came home to take care of Mom. So we were, as we continued to dig, really wondering, like, where in the heck did he get the money to build, you know, a radiation center and build onto a hospital? Because everything that we've read and seen is that all of his money that he made in his lumber industries, he invested in land. So, you know, it wasn't cash. He didn't have a lot of cash assets. So we discovered that Philip, Dorothy, Edward, Cap, and Leslie Savage got some farm loans. There were some farm loans at the town, and they leveraged about 9,800 acres. 93, thank you, yes. they got loans, because there were limits to how big they could be, on leveraged about 9,300 acres of the Colorado Ranch. And that's where he got the money to build that. So now she's gone. Philip's not doing so great running the ranch. So we think, to offset that burden and relieve some of that liability, he brokered a deal with a guy from Mississippi. He swapped 9,300 acres of the Colorado ranch lands for an 1,800 acre Mississippi plantation. Yeah. So they were going to now go to Mississippi and raise cotton and soybeans and whatever. And I guess, maybe it made sense to get Philip and the family closer to home, although, of course, Dorothy was out here with her family in the Allen Ranch, but that really is just the only reason we can think that they did this crazy sounding deal to us. Let's see, and in the deal, so part of the deal was, in that swap, they're swapping the lands, but with the lands went the loans, right? So whoever bought those did assume those loans. And the deal, I'd say, supposedly included the loans, because we get a little more about that later. But so, son Philip Sr., Ethel, and their family left Mayor and their little house, little Mayor farm, and moved to Mississippi. And back to the hot and humidity and bugs. Let's see. Those of us on the Phillips side, I never heard much about this growing up. I mean, nobody ever talked about it. So I don't know. It's hard to get a handle. Of course, now my dad's gone. He might have had some insight. But it sure looks like it was to get out from under those financial burdens, get him closer to home, try to find something that was a fit for him to do, and get him stabilized a little bit. So they did that when did they do that, Brett? 1924. In April of 1927 was the Great Flood of Mississippi. They were right on the Mississippi River. In fact, they were like 27 miles from the biggest levee break in the river during that Great Flood. So they essentially lost, I'm sure they lost everything because, everything's flooded. These pictures are after the water has already come down. It was, I don't know. We saw some of the pictures where the markings were much higher on the homes. So that means all their crops got washed away, livestock got washed away, homes, businesses, everything. At the time, just a little story, my 11-year-old grandfather said he remembers that the snakes were crawling up the walls to get out of the water. I know, so that creepy. So anyway, Cap's writings say, I took a big loss that year. Okay. So anyway, then, this is kind of interesting too, to make matters worse, that 9,300 acre land deal from Colorado had fallen through. And for most of 1928, Cap, with some Gunnison lawyers and Leslie Savage, fought legal battles in the Montrose County courts. The case went, the appeal of the verdict went all the way to the Colorado Supreme Court. All because these federal farm loans were in default. So the people that he did the swap with, at least I think the second batch, we're not sure about, I don't want to point fingers at the first batch because there were 2 transactions, but they didn't pay the mortgages, they didn't pay the water fees for the irrigation, and they didn't pay the taxes. So, and then somehow, which we just can't quite figure out, he also, in that suit, he sued the county clerks from Montrose, Delta, and Gunnison County, because some of the properties were in all those counties. So it sounds like the county clerks didn't do the transfers like they were supposed to, because then they came back on Kemp for the money. And he did pay some of those late fees. But the good news, so this has a little bit of a happy ending, is that after all this, through the courts, it went on for about a year, Cap was awarded, he prevailed, and he was awarded $27,000 settlement, I think. And all of the properties were auctioned off in the Sheriffsville. And the lot of the properties was $28,000. So he bought them all back. Although they still had the loans, but he got them all back. So it's kind of a wild story. I don't understand, we aren't lawyers and we don't understand, and clearly transactions happened much differently back then than they do today. Maybe that's why we have title companies, as much as they're hard to deal with. But those loans he did still continue to have, and we learned that, his kids paid them off. It took 45 years. 16 more years to get to 1945 to get them paid off, and they did. So, back to, we're thinking those were loans taken to try to save mom, spouse. But anyway, it's kind of an interesting story. The lawsuit, Brett got a copy of the Supreme Court documents, and it's, beyond me, but it was very interesting, the fight and how it ever happened in the first place. By 1930, Cap, Ethel, that group, their kids were all back in CrossFit. Philip was trying to be a proprietor of a meat business, and that didn't go well either, but of course that was right in the heart of the Depression. So we won't point fingers at him then. They still had the Colorado Ranch properties, and they were generating enough lease payments to pay the mortgages. So that was nice. And of course, that property on Crystal Creek, they could still come out, and that was not in the part that was ever mortgaged, from what we could tell. Cap died in 1935 at the age of 69. He is buried in, did I skip something about the house? Oh, that was his house. So the house was company provided, so they had this nice, big, beautiful house. Of course, I don't think any of us here, it was torn down in 1960 something. 42? Oh, Georgia Pacific bought the company in 62. But there is now a rodeo arena there with some plaques and me holding up the plaques. So he died. Shortly after that, Philip became the postmaster, and he was postmaster until he retired. Dorothy remained out here with her family, raising them on the Double H Ranch in Mayer, where I'm sure many of y'all are familiar with that, until she moved into Hotchkiss in 1962. And then Cap's youngest son, Edward, he had continued on in the forestry business this whole time. I think he was the serious businessman of the bunch. And he did end up, he was in Alabama for a long time, but he ended his career coming back to Arkansas, where he was president of a lumber mill there. One little other aside that is cute, I think. So I mentioned that Dorothy, who would be my aunt, some of your moms or grandmas, and she moved into Hotchkiss, and she lived in that cute little, I think it was green at the time, turret house on Main Street. After she died, my dad bought that house from the family, and he lived there for 20 years. So we love that little house a lot. Final loans on all this stuff were satisfied in 1945, like Brett said, and the family, started selling off the properties over time. That was also very interesting, looking at all these deeds, people we know or people we've heard of, for large parcels to the Tracys, Meeks, the Rockwells, Zeldin Thews, the Grahams, Briggs, Ayers, probably others that I didn't mention. But it's just fun seeing all the names. Let's see. Oh, and the largest parcel, the last sale, we still have that Crystal Creek part, was 7,200 acres of the out west over by the parkland, sold to the Motts. And I think, the Motts ultimately sold or gave it to the National Park Service. I don't have the details on that. But so there's our cute little cabin, a nice picture. Today, there are probably over 100 of us who now share this property on Crystal Creek. We still do have the 320 acres that Cap so loved and the cabin that he also loved and spent lots of time at. We incorporated it in 1994, so it's sort of kind of operated as a business. We have a board that makes the decisions, and as you get this many family members owning one something, you kind of have to do something different, or you never get anything done. Sometimes it's hard with our 7. No, we do great. We lease the pasture, and that gives us some income to take care of it. And we do charge our family members who come visit a small nightly usage fee. And you can stay in this glorious part of the country. Let's see, what else? I am at the very end, so we also, the land is protected. In 2010, we did do a conservation easement on that, so it is protected, hopefully forever. We do have to pay close attention to the grazing and pasture management, but it is still a great place that's being enjoyed by the family. We did, and I really am going to shut up soon. Another fun thing that has been, so part of the time, we still keep like a little logbook of people who come out there, and you come and you write, I saw 50 out this morning or whatever. There's lots of that, or whatever happened, whoever was out there. And in the fun, there's really some fun pages, I think, back in the 40s and 50s, because they had a lot of parties out there all the time. It kind of looks like, really. Lots of bridge, I understand. And a lot of y'all's families' names. A lot of you, Miss Pat, I saw you in there, I know. Marilyn, I saw some of your parents, I know. And, people just gathered. They gathered. It was really fun. And one thing Brett and I have noticed in these last couple of years in the summer, this community still does that, gathers and shares experiences and knowledge and history with each other. We've gone to a couple this summer. It's just been really nice to be included. We appreciate y'all for inviting us, but it's just fun to get to know people and see a community. I think a lot of us don't have that in other areas where we live, so that is really nice. But I think in those years of the 40s and 50s, for sure, the Philip and Edward, the 2 brothers who didn't live in Colorado, I think they just kind of moved out here every summer. I don't know how you did that with a job, but they came out here. So, let's see, what else is important to show? Oh, sometime if y'all come out to visit us, you can look at some of the signatures in the books and pick out your ancestors. We've also, over the years, had a lot of hunting parties, weddings, memorials, honeymoons. Brett and I honeymooned out here. Julie and Bill got married out here, had your reception here, maybe some others in the family, so it really is special. I sprinkled a little bit of my dad out there and the rest up on top, so he's in his happy place, and I suspect he's not the only one out there. We think, back to the cabin, a little bit more about the cabin, so we think it was built in and around 1882, 1881, maybe. Bud was just sharing some information. We're trying to figure out the first person we think, or the person that we think built it, was a guy named Glower Freeman. He sold it to Theodore Kremling in 1883. And then Kremling operated it as a trading post. And what we've read in some of the other historical writings and work from some of the other people is that it was the only trading post, for folks coming across White Mesa until Elizabeth Long opened up her store in Crawford. So, that's an early, significant adventure. I will say the Gates never did operate it as a store or trading post. Some of Theodore Crumling's family continued to live in the cabin until 1906, from what we can tell, when his son-in-law, Oscar Flannery, sold it to Charles Stoner for $2,550. Those prices, of course, done all of us today, right? And then a year later, Stoner sold it to a gentleman named Thomas Malloy. We didn't find a lot about Malloy. I think he was a former miner from Leadville. And then he sold it to the Morrow and Gates Cattle Company in January of 1910. So our family, well, in, the business owned it beginning in January of 1910. And we laugh because we figure they were already familiar with the property. If you buy something out there in the middle of the winter, you probably didn't go look at it in the winter because there would be a lot of snow, maybe not this year, but maybe in those years there was a lot of snow. And didn't probably have a home inspection, but they bought it and it has been in the family ever since. No cat, he got to work, he added bathrooms and bedrooms and made it, I guess he already had his vision probably of bringing people out here. Although from what we can tell, they also would pitch tents and, make do have places to stay. But, they added the kitchen and bathrooms and bedrooms and a sleeping porch, which is still there. If you're brave enough to sleep out there, I'm not, but my brother-in-law will sleep nowhere else. So, to each his own. And even then, electrical, telephone in 1972 with George Tracy and Doug Wynett, they piped water down from the spring so that you could have some better drinking water. Let's see, in 2014, we built a new structure, which we call the Lodge, which is there on the left. And it's been great. I was one of the ones who really wasn't keen on doing that, but I have certainly enjoyed it because I do not like listening to the mice go on the ceiling and stuff. So I have to say it's been very nice, and I think it's been nice for the family because we're not full all summer, but we do get quite a good representation of folks coming throughout the summer, which is very nice. The sad part is the old cabin doesn't get much use anymore other than by the rodents and the whistlepigs, so they're very destructive, and it's getting to be in a bad way. And if you clean it up, it's like, the next week it's back to being destroyed by the critters, so you can't keep them out. So one of the things Brett mentioned when we originally, and that's a picture of what it looked like originally before all the add-ons. We had reached out to Carl, Brett had reached out to Carl to talk to the Historical Society about ideas of, ways we could save it, ways we could, are there grant funds? Does the community have an interest in this? Is it meaningful to the community? Would it be worth moving it somewhere where more people could have access? Because right now where it sits, now that we've built the lodge, you can't see it from the road. And I would think, we don't want people just coming to look at it while you're there having your vacation or whatever it is you're, communing with nature sort of unexpectedly. It wouldn't be convenient. Plus there might be some liability with that, I don't know. So we look to you and ask you, the community, what you think about that, or do you have ideas, or, is there any avenues to pursue saving it and doing something with it? Maybe, I personally think, and this is just speaking for me personally, that being able to move it somewhere where others could see it would be ideal, because where it is, you really can't. And it would be sad to let it go. So I'm going to end on that. Please feel free to share your ideas. Anybody have questions? Or I know it's been long. Anybody in the family want to correct me, or Orville, or Bud? Sandy has that nice sign up there, and so our thought is, it may have been part of it, or the barn part of it, because the Kremling house that's over there in Sandy and Leroy's property, it's not old enough. It's built with planed lumber, right? So it that wouldn't have been built looking like that in 1881 or 82. Yeah, so it had to be a later structure.
My dad always just said that was the old trading post. So it's your old
That's what we, yeah, I mean, we don't have any definitive writings, but as we were looking at all this stuff, that's what makes sense. A lot of it because of the style and the materials that the barn, I mean, maybe that was the barn or added later. Oh, yes, ma'am.